Okay, so get this. You know how we always do these deep dives, right?
Yeah.
Well, this time you sent over a bunch of video essays about fat acceptance, but get this, they're all from creators who seriously disagree with the whole movement.
Oh, wow. So we're looking at the movement through a very critical lens this time.
Yeah, basically. And you know what they say? You got to hear both sides to really get it right.
Totally.
But
I mean, to understand a movement, you really need to understand the arguments against it. That's where the real insights are.
Exactly. So before we jump into all that, can you remind us what the fat acceptance movement is all about in a nutshell?
Sure. So basically, the fat acceptance movement is all about, dismantling all that prejudice and discrimination against people just because of their weight.
Okay.
It's about promoting acceptance of bigger bodies and challenging that idea that, being fat is automatically a bad thing.
So it's like shifting how we see bodies and saying everyone deserves respect no matter their size.
Exactly. That's the core of it. The movement is all about, pushing back against this idea that there's only one right way to have a body and emphasizing body positivity and self-love.
Makes sense. But one thing that keeps popping up in these videos is this clash between the health at every size thing some people in the movement are into and what doctors say about the health risks that come with obesity.
Yeah, that's a huge point of disagreement. And it kind of gets to the heart of how we think about health and responsibility in society.
For sure.
So on one side, you've got this health at every size approach, HES.
Correct.
And HES is all about shifting the focus away from weight loss as the main sign of health.
Interesting.
Instead, it says you can be healthy at any weight and focuses on well-being in a broader sense.
I see.
Thinking about things like mental health, moving your body in ways you enjoy, and eating intuitive.
So it's less about the number on the scale and more about doing things that make you feel good physically and mentally.
Yeah, exactly. It's about creating a sustainable lifestyle that nourishes your mind and body.
Got it. But then critics come in and say, hold up, they're worried this approach kind of ignores the health risks that can come with obesity, like heart disease, type 2 diabetes, some types of cancer.
Yeah, that's where the tension really ramps up. It's like two different conversations happening at the same time.
Totally. One is focused on feeling good in the moment. The other is waving a big red flag about potential problems down the line.
Exactly. And to make things even trickier, some of these videos bring up research suggesting that more acceptance of larger bodies might actually lead to people not managing their weight, even when it's medically recommended.
Wait, really? That's kind of mind-blowing. Tell me more about that research.
Okay, so one study, this was published in the journal Obesity, found that wider acceptance of larger bodies might be linked to people underestimating their own weight. And because of that, they might be less likely to try to lose weight. The researchers think this might be because if society is more accepting of being overweight, then people might see it as less of a health concern.
So basically the thinking is if there's less stigma around weight, people might not be as motivated to address potential health risks.
Yeah, that's a pretty big implication. And it brings up a huge question. Where does personal responsibility begin and societal pressure end?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And
Yeah.
it's like fuel for this whole debate around fat acceptance. It's all tangled up with individual choices, societal norms, and how we see health and well-being.
Definitely. A lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
And we haven't even touched on the financial side of things yet.
Oh, yeah. Several creators brought up the idea of a fat tax.
Right. The idea that people of bigger sizes often have to shell out extra money or deal with more burdens just because of their size.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
One of the sources, we got a blog post called "It Happened Flying While Fat," really lays out the stress and financial strain that comes with air travel for larger people.
Oh, I saw that one. The writer talks about having to buy a first-class ticket just to be comfortable and actually fit in the seat.
Yeah. It's stories like that that make you really think about how we accommodate different bodies in society and if we're doing enough.
It raises the question, should airlines have to offer bigger seats without charging more? Or is that asking too much of them and other passengers?
Right. Those are tough questions.
Yeah.
There are no easy answers.
Definitely. It makes you grapple with the ethics and logistics of making a truly inclusive society. It's like, where's that line between personal responsibility and making sure everyone is accommodated?
Exactly. And how do we even talk about all this without sounding judgmental or like we're shaming people, which seems to be another big issue in these videos?
You're right. It's like walking a tightrope because any criticism of the fat acceptance movement, no matter how well-intentioned, can get labeled as insensitive or discriminatory.
Yeah. One of the videos even used Jillian Michaels as an example. The fitness trainer from The Biggest Loser.
Oh, yeah. What happened with her?
She said some things about Lizzo's weight that caused a huge uproar. People were accusing her of fat shaming left and right.
Wow.
But the interesting thing is Michaels kept saying her concern was about health, not looks. She even said she loves Lizzo's music but wasn't going to celebrate her weight.
That's a tough one. It shows how hard it is to talk about weight and health without setting people off, especially with social media amplifying everything.
Yeah. It seems like any conversation that doesn't fully embrace every single part of being overweight, including the potential health risks is instantly labeled as fat shaming.
It's a tricky situation for sure.
Yeah.
So how do we talk about legitimate health concerns without coming across as judgmental?
Right. Where's that line between genuine concern and just being plain mean?
And it's not just a societal dilemma. It's a real challenge for doctors too.
How so?
A lot of doctors are saying it's getting harder to talk to patients about weight-related health issues without getting backlash or being accused of fat shaming.
So we need to figure out how to have these important conversations without shutting down dialogue or hurting people.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance.
Yeah, it's like one wrong step and boom, you've set off a whole explosion of content.
It really is. And, this whole idea of walking on eggshells kind of leads us to another criticism of the fat acceptance movement, the whole victim mentality thing.
Right. Oh, yeah, that popped up a lot in these videos.
Yeah, a lot of these creators are arguing that fat acceptance kind of encourages people to blame everything but themselves for their weight or health issues.
So, like, instead of focusing on what they can control, they're blaming society or the food industry.
Exactly. And there's this worry that focusing so much on outside factors could make people feel helpless.
Like they can't do anything to change their situation.
Right. And it might make it harder for them to actually take steps to improve their health.
I see what they're getting at.
Yeah.
One of the creators even made this analogy about, like, celebrating a broken leg after jumping off a building.
Oh, wow. That's a pretty strong image.
Yeah, their point was you shouldn't be shamed for the injury, but you also shouldn't celebrate the bad decision that caused it.
Okay, I get the analogy. But isn't there another side to this whole thing? What about all those systemic factors that play a role in obesity, like food deserts or poverty?
That's a really good point. It's not as simple as just saying it's all your fault.
Right. Critics of this victim mentality argument would say, sure, personal responsibility matters, but you can't ignore those bigger issues that make it way harder for some people to be healthy.
So it's not just personal choices versus the system. It's like a big tangled mess of both.
Exactly. And the challenge is figuring out how to address both sides of the equation. You can't just focus on one and ignore the other.
For instance, a lot of fat acceptance advocates talk about food deserts.
Yeah, those areas where it's almost impossible to find fresh, affordable, healthy food.
Right, and if you add in things like limited access to healthcare or just not having enough money to buy healthy food, it's clear that personal choices can only go so far.
Totally. You can't just tell someone to eat better when they literally don't have access to better options.
Exactly. So while the argument against a victim mentality makes sense, we also have to remember that people's choices are shaped by all these outside forces.
For sure. It's way more complicated than just blaming individuals.
Which takes us back to that tightrope walk we were talking about earlier, balancing personal responsibility with understanding the bigger picture.
And that actually leads us to another criticism that comes up in these videos. The idea that there's a lot of double standards and hypocrisy within the fat acceptance movement itself.
Ooh, this should be good. Tell me more.
So a lot of these creators are calling out what they see as hypocrisy in how the movement talks about body image.
Okay, how so?
Well, they're saying on one hand, the movement is all about accepting larger bodies, but then on the other hand, they're criticizing thin people and the pressure to be thin.
So it's like they're saying, it's great to celebrate our bodies, but don't you dare celebrate yours if you're skinny.
That's pretty much it. They're seeing a double standard there. One of the videos even called out Brandy Melville, that clothing brand.
Oh yeah, I know that one. They have super limited sizes, right?
Yeah, pretty much only catering to smaller bodies, and the creator was arguing that this kind of exclusivity just adds to the pressure on women to be thin.
Which is a fair point. I mean, body image pressures can mess with anyone's head no matter their size.
Absolutely. But it is kind of ironic, isn't it? Like the movement wants inclusivity, but only for certain bodies.
Yeah, it's a bit of a head scratcher.
So it makes you wonder, do these criticisms of thinness actually weaken the movement's message of acceptance?
Or are they valid calls to challenge those harmful beauty standards that hurt everyone?
It's a question worth thinking about, I think. So we've covered a lot here: health concerns, societal accommodations, fat shaming, and now this whole hypocrisy thing. It's a lot to take in.
My brain is definitely doing some mental gymnastics right now.
It's important to step back and look at the big picture. I think a lot of the criticism boils down to a disagreement about what fat acceptance should really stand for.
Okay, explain that a little more.
So it seems like some of the pushback is coming from the movement's insistence on accepting every single aspect of being overweight.
And they're not just talking about the social or emotional parts, but also the health risks.
Exactly. Critics are saying, yeah, it's super important to love yourself and feel good about your body, but you also have to acknowledge the health concerns that can come with obesity.
So they're worried that ignoring those concerns could actually hurt people. in the long run.
Yeah, it's like they're saying the movement has gone too far and it's pushed for acceptance,
Yeah.
that it's lost sight of some important realities.
That's a good way to put it. So where do we go from here? We've talked about all these criticisms and concerns. Kind of overwhelming, honestly.
I know it's a lot, but I think there are some key takeaways here.
Yeah.
Even with all the strong opinions and heated debates, it's clear that the fat acceptance movement has touched a nerve.
For sure. It sparked all these important conversations about body image, societal pressures, empathy, and understanding.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We need to be talking about these things. But the big takeaway, I think, is that things get really messy when the focus shifts from accepting people to accepting unhealthy behaviors.
That's it, isn't it? A lot of these critics are saying that true self-love means taking care of both your mental and physical well-being.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that means acknowledging potential health risks and making choices that support your health.
So it's all about finding that balance, right? Celebrating body positivity and fighting stereotypes while also being realistic about health and personal responsibility.
You got it.
Oh.
It's not one or the other. It's both. We can embrace diversity and fight for inclusivity while also encouraging healthy choices and acknowledging that obesity can have serious consequences.
It's about finding that middle ground where we can hold two seemingly opposite ideas in our heads at the same time.
Exactly.
And that brings us to a question for you, our listener. How do you think we as a society can find that sweet spot? How do we promote body positivity and challenge stereotypes while also encouraging healthy choices and acknowledging the potential health risks associated with obesity? It's complicated for sure.
It definitely is. There's no easy answer.
Yeah.
It takes some serious thinking, empathy, and a willingness to listen to different points of view.
Yeah, it really is a balancing act, and it takes a lot of open-mindedness to even start these conversations. You know, one thing that's really stood out to me is how much emotion is packed into these videos.
Oh, for sure. The language in some of these essays is pretty strong. Like, they're not holding back at all.
Yeah, no kidding. Some of the words they use, like cancer and retarded, really caught my attention.
Yeah, I noticed that too.
And while those words are definitely offensive and can be really hurtful, I can't help but wonder if they also show just how frustrated and hurt people are when it comes to this whole body image and health thing.
I think that's a good point. It's like all these anxieties and pain are bubbling up, and sometimes that comes out in not so great language.
Yeah, it's a reminder that even though these conversations are super important, we need to be careful and respectful.
Yeah.
It's easy to get caught up in the moment and say something you regret.
Absolutely. We need to create spaces where people feel safe sharing their thoughts, even if those thoughts are controversial or make people uncomfortable.
Right, because if we just shut each other down, we'll never get anywhere.
True progress can only happen when we're willing to grapple with the complexity of the issue and hear from everyone, not just the people we agree with.
Well said. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the biggest takeaway for you from exploring all these criticisms of the fat acceptance movement?
I think the biggest thing for me is realizing that this isn't about choosing sides or deciding who's right and who's wrong.
It's bigger than that.
Yeah, it's about recognizing that this issue is super complex and being willing to have open and honest conversations, even when they're tough. The fat acceptance movement, even with its flaws and all the criticism, has definitely brought some important issues to light.
Like what?
It's made us confront our biases, question those narrow ideas of beauty, and push for more inclusivity and understanding.
And on the other side, looking at these critiques has reminded us how important personal responsibility is.
Yeah.
And acknowledging the health risks and finding that balance between loving yourself and making healthy choices.
Exactly. It's not an either thing. It's both. We can totally support body positivity and challenge those harmful stereotypes while also encouraging healthy habits and recognizing that obesity can have serious consequences.
It's about finding that middle ground where we can hold on to those seemingly opposite ideas at the same time.
Yeah, embracing the complexity of it all.
Love that. So we've covered a lot today. We explored the criticisms of the fat acceptance movement, dug into the whole health versus body positivity debate, and unpacked those accusations of fat shaming, victimhood, and hypocrisy. It's been a wild ride.
It has. And hopefully it's given our listeners some food for thought.
For sure. Maybe you agree with some of the criticisms, or maybe you totally disagree. The important thing is that we keep talking about it. Keep those conversations going.
Exactly. Let's keep questioning, keep listening, and keep working towards a world where everyone feels seen, heard, and respected no matter their size.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And that brings us to the end of another deep dive. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep those brains buzzing.